Hey everybody, my name is Les Geller. I'm the program coordinator of SAGE Central North Carolina. I would like to thank Pax Baptiste from AARP for helping us produce 4 very important programs over the course of the month of June, which is of course Pride Month, including this one that we're doing tonight. I'd also like to thank Corey Hennessy from the LGBT Center of Raleigh for also pitching in and helping us put these events together. She's really helped put a lot of loose threads in place, and we're very grateful for that. And of course, thank you all, everybody, for joining us this evening to take part in what is going to be a very interesting program, I think. Before we start, I would like to take a minute to let you know some of the other programs that SAGE is going to be presenting during Pride Month. There's quite a number of them. The next one, which is on July 11th at 7 o'clock, is called Courageous Conversations, and will be discussion of the victories and the setbacks facing the transgender community. This one is also co-sponsored with AARP of North Carolina. On June 15th at 7, SAGE will be doing a talent show from some of our members, including guitar, violin, piano, and organ performances, and possibly some spoken word as well. For more information on this, you can go to our meetup page, the SAGE meetup page, and you can sign up to attend at that point. On the 17th, from 6 to 7:30, we'll be doing a program called Staying Active, Engaged, and Fabulous, which will include the latest tips from the Alzheimer's Association of North Carolina. On the 18th, and I'm really proud of this program, at 2:00 p.m., we'll be doing a program called the LGBTQ Community and the Political Scene in the Triangle, again co-sponsored with AARP North Carolina. It's going to be hosted by Kendra Johnson, who is the Executive Director of Equality NC, and will be featuring City Council persons Jonathan Melton and Stormy Fort, and Congresspersons David Price and Deborah Ross. And we'll be discussing the current political scene in North Carolina as it relates to our community, and maybe a little bit about what's going on with the Equality Act. There are plenty of questions to ask about that. On the 22nd, we will also be doing a screening of the new documentary called Cured. That will be at 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon. This will also be co-sponsored by AARP North Carolina. We do not yet have the links for joining in the presentation, but that will come as it comes closer. We will be putting it on our meetup page. And finally, I'd like to just reiterate what Trey was saying about the Pride as a Highway. It's the LGBT Center of Raleigh Pride Car Parade at Dorothea Dix Park. SAGE hopes to have quite a presence there, and we hope to see a bunch of our friends there. It does cost, if you want to enter a car into the parade, well, it is a fundraiser for the LGBT Center of Raleigh, so there is a fee for doing that. But if you just want to go and watch and have fun, it's all free. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to George Alwan, who's going to be facilitating tonight's program. George, take it away.
Thank you, Les. It's really amazing what our community is doing for Pride. I'm really proud and thankful for the effort that so many different groups are working, and also what AARP is doing to step out and be so out front in helping us to be proud of our heritage and who we are. So thank you, Pax, and thank you, AARP, and to the rest of you. Panelists, I appreciate you all being here. My name's George Alwan. I am president of Raleigh Consulting Group. I am in an intergenerational, intercultural relationship, and interracial sometimes. I would look at it that way. So I have a little bit of experience living the intergenerational experience. We have panelists today who are going to help us share and understand from a historical perspective, what it's like to either grow up in the Triangle or come to the Triangle or the Triangle area and come out. What are those experiences like from different generations? All of us understand and know, we've heard a lot about coming out stories, but I think what's interesting now is how do we look at this from an intergenerational perspective, and how do we look at it from being here? I know I thought I came out in Brooklyn, New York, but it was really here in the Chapel Hill area where I came out. My friends all knew in Brooklyn. I didn't know. They knew. So I don't know where coming out was. For me personally, it was here. I'd like to take a couple of moments and introduce our panelists who volunteered to be here, of course. We have Bev, who, like me, was born in she's born in New York City. I was born in the New York City area. As an adult, she was a massage therapist and a trainer in peer counseling. She was one of the first open planning meetings for the LGBT Center. She was two people who advocated for the elders. I could never guess why, but if you would do that, but I guess there probably is a good reason for that. And the other person is here too, Les, two of them advocating for the elders at the opening of the LGBT Center. She was on the stage planning committee for several years. Bev, is there anything I missed that you'd like to add to that? You're muted, Bev. If the panelists can unmute. You can hit your space bar if you're on a computer while you're, okay. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
That was fine, thank you.
Okay, that's good. And could you tell us what generation you identify with?
I am an early boomer.
An early boomer, that's cool. All right. I guess I should share too that even though technically I am silent generation, I was born in 1945, my heart, my soul is boomer. So I'm with you on that. Jim, tell us a little bit about what generation you are from. I know that you are a website designer, computer application programmer. You do graphics, you do work with Sage, you do work with the LGBT Center and the MCC in Durham. Could you tell us a little bit about anything else you'd like to add on what?
Yeah, I'm also a member of St. John's MCC here in Raleigh. I do work with the MCC in Durham, and I love that. I'm a boomer. I'm right smack dab in the middle of boomers, without a doubt.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Tori's an assistant attorney general with the North Carolina Department of Justice. He does something very interesting that I'm going to let him tell us a little bit about. So Tori, can you tell us who you identify with and what generation you identify with, and a little bit about your work if you want?
Oh yeah, thank you. I'm in Generation X, and for the last 10 years, I've been working at the North Carolina Department of Justice as an assistant attorney general. I work in the consumer protection division. And so I pretty much, when people ask me what I do, I just tell them that I work in the division. We fight scams and predatory financial dealings throughout North Carolina. And so I focus mainly on motor vehicles, which is kind of distant from what we're talking about today, but it's pertinent to all of our lives because there's a lot of cars out there. So yep. That's what I do on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you. Thanks for your service. And Trey is an community engagement manager for a nonprofit that's involved with Dix Park. He is also co-founder of Raleigh Pride. He's an organizer. And Trey, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and what generation you identify with?
Yeah, I am a millennial. And I don't know what that says about whatever trauma I've probably ever gone through, but yeah, I work for the nonprofit, the Dix Park Conservancy, which is the partner with the city of Raleigh on helping guide the future of Dix Park. I'm very excited to be here and have this conversation. I'm someone who grew up in the Triangle on the outskirts and in the country, and then moved here to Raleigh, to the city. So I have these two different experiences that I'm interested in sharing.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to start off well, first, I want to remind everyone that you can use the chat box. Pax is helping us coordinate questions on the chat box, and she may have to ping me occasionally to remind me to look at the chat box for questions that the audience may be asking us. But let me start off with Bev and ask her a question. What was life like in Raleigh for the LGBT community when you came out?
Okay, I have a printed answer, so I'll try to get it succinct. In the late 1970s and early 80s, there were not many resources for lesbian and bisexual women. Folks met at their homes, at gay bars, or on the softball field to socialize. It was dangerous to be out. There was no social safety net, no LGB centers, little mention of trans folks, no queer identity, no protection under the law, few affirming churches, no Oprah, and no Ellen.
Wow. What was it like? What were the dangers like? What did you experience dangers?
Yeah, at the time, the new Raleigh Women's Center was not welcoming of lesbians and bisexual women, and lesbian women risked losing their family, their friends, jobs, and having run-ins with the police. Some women face the mental health system not by choice.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Trey, why don't you tell us from the millennial generation what it was like for you, in both situations that you talked about?
For me, I never was really around a lot of LGBT people growing up.
Where'd you grow up? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a small town called Hollister, North Carolina, which is like an hour away from Raleigh.
Okay.
Yeah, and I didn't really have any examples or anything except what I could see on TV, and most of the time they played up on stereotypes up until a certain point, I believe. But yeah, the town that I grew up from is a small southern town, but it's majority Native American and Black that live in the area, and mainly Democrat. And so a lot of people were sort of open to the idea, but also had their ignorance because you didn't get really much exposure to gay people in the area. Yeah.
So when you hear Bev talk about what you just said, how do you react? What's your gut tell you when you hear
I react that I hate that there was not much exposure, but I kind of also envy the ability to congregate in certain places, because for me it was a loneliness because there was nowhere to congregate. The closest place to congregate was an hour away at the LGBT center. And I do remember when I first got my first car at like 18, I actually drove an hour to go to the LGBT center in Raleigh. And it was really my first experience of having a place that was for gay people. Because before, it was nowhere for me in my hometown.
Gotcha. All right, let's jump. Thank you for sharing. Now, Jim, tell us about your experience in coming out.
Well, there were very, very few people that knew that I was gay up until 1995, when I came busting out of the closet. I separated at that point from my wife of 15 years, and I was so very, very much in the closet. I remember two particular things, well, three really, and cut me off if I get too long here, George. You know how I talk. I remember going to CC's, Capitol Corral, for the first time, in 1995, and saying, "Oh,
How old are you then?"
I was much younger.
Thanks, Jim.
Much younger. I was, let's see, I guess about 42, 43.
Okay.
or something like that.
So you were still married.
Yeah, and well, yes, I was still married, and so the and I thought this is the place. You know, here are these people that they don't seem to be worried about being here, and it just took it was such a struggle to go into the door. But on the first Sunday of June of 1995, I walked in the door of St. John's MCC. Now, you'll notice what 2 days from now is. So this is an anniversary weekend for me. But and I said, oh, this is where I need to be. This is exactly where I need to be. Because all of a sudden I started finding rather healthy, well, some healthier than others, but healthy people to be able to associate with and find out what they do. Because I didn't have a role model. Everything that I had heard before came from what I had seen as I was lurking around in the bookstores. I remember, and now, you know, I had it so easy. I had, because I have white male privilege. I hadn't had a whole lot of hassle coming out. But I remember going to the White Rabbit and buying a little tiny pride strip to put under the license plate of my back.
Tell us what the White Rabbit was.
The White Rabbit was our the more respectable of our bookstores. I went to other bookstores as well, which is how come I found out what the White Rabbit was. They also had the community bulletin board there. But I went into the White Rabbit, bought this little tiny pride strip to put under my license plate. Well, I was getting gas one night, one afternoon, and a bunch of teenagers, teenage boys, probably high school boys, saw that little glimpse of color on the bumper of my car, and they started harassing me. And I, in my very, very limited way, because I had never felt this before, all of a sudden I felt afraid. I didn't know what they were going to do to me. Now, they just were going to shout and holler and that kind of thing. But I had never been harassed like that before, ever in my life. And so I was afraid. And, I got to admit, that is such a very compared to everybody else, in the world, that's not much. But so I got a little tiny taste of that.
I got it. Okay, good. A little tiny taste. All right, let me just jump over to Tori for a moment. Would you like to share with us your experience?
Yeah, of course. I'm sort of like Trey in the respect that I grew up in a small southern town of Danville, Virginia. It's a small city on the southern Virginia border, and it's known as being the city of churches. That's what it's known for in Virginia. And actually, my parents are pastors. They founded a church there. My older brother is the co-pastor, and my younger sister is the minister of music. But I say all that to say that I came from a pretty conservative background. And I remember growing up and thinking in Danville that I was the only person that was gay that was there. Like I really thought that for a long time. I guess I experienced some form of liberation when I came to this area in the early 2000s to go to Duke Law School and Divinity School. And I still was not out at that time. I wasn't even close to coming out. But I found a space on campus that was, they called it the socially queer. It was SQ. And that was sort of like an undergraduate space. It was open to the whole university, but it was predominantly undergraduate, where you could come, and it was very secretive. Like it was like in the basement of one of the buildings over near the chapel. And so I would go there on I think it was Thursday evenings, and we just chat, and they would have refreshments. And that's where I first felt like a lot of liberation and confidence, because I saw people who were like me. And then from that, it led me to go to the club scene, which I would go towards the weekend. I would go out in Chapel Hill. I can't even think of the name of the bar then, but on Fridays and Saturdays, I would come to Raleigh. And at that time, it was Legends, it was CC, and it was Flex. And so we would come there. A lot of times I would go by myself because I didn't know anybody. I had some bad experiences at one of the bars. I'm not gonna say which one it was, but at that time, the bars were very segregated racially. Some of it was self-segregation, I suppose. But I you know, my ears perked up when someone, I think it was Jim, said something about CC, but that's where I used to go, like on Thursday nights, which was a hip hop night. But I didn't come out until later on after that. I came out like in my late 20s, and I sort of was kind of pulled out of the closet. I mean, I was ready to do it, but I look back and it seems like I always had a tendency to date people who were more out of the closet. So that kind of pulled me out of the closet. Like,
absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. So I want to move back to our seniors and ask, I hope you don't mind that term, but what do you, knowing what younger folks are experiencing and how it's different, what do you wish that you had as a LGBT person decades ago that would have made your life better? What could have helped? Beth?
Well, since I didn't get to share about the good part of my experience,
go ahead.
I'd like to do that too.
Go ahead.
And I'll just say that when I was coming out into this, it was a period of the time when the women's liberation movement was first coming to the Triangle. And so women were meeting together to talk. And there was a feminist bookstore that opened up in Oakwood. Mm-hmm. And a group of Raleigh lesbians formed a collective, and I was part of that collective. And we ran a monthly women's coffee house that had potlucks, concerts, workshops, and other activities in a safe, non-alcoholic space. And this coffee house went on for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. In Durham, the lesbians there were more focused on politics, and they formed the Triangle Area Lesbian Feminist, or TALF. Several Durham women formed a company called Lady Slipper Music. Yeah. And they brought lesbian musicians to the Triangle and sold records that were exclusively by lesbians and women. Hundreds of lesbian women went to those concerts. And out of that, the lesbian community was born in the Triangle because it was a place where so many women could come together. And another thing that happened about this time was the beginning of a Raleigh women's potluck. Mm-hmm. That potluck started probably back in the 80s, and it was still going until COVID hit, which is almost 40 years. And I have been the facilitator of that potluck group for about the last 10 years.
So I got a question for you. I have a question for you. When was I believe it's a Lady Slipper. What years? Do you remember when that was?
That was probably from 78 until, I think just in the last 10 years, they went out of business as a record company. I mean, they still have a record catalog.
Okay. I was wrong. The question was, when were the potlucks?
The potlucks?
Yeah.
I can't remember when they started. I'm going to say probably in the 80s. But that's been a monthly potluck that has lasted until 2019.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah. And that's in Raleigh.
Okay. So if there's anything I distracted you, I apologize. Is there anything that you wish you could have had back then?
I wish that I had two parents who were more concerned about me than they were about their social standing and position in the community.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Jim.
Yeah, I echo that. I am also about my parents. They certainly, although my father was more supportive than my mother was, it would have been nice to have had affirmations that it was okay to be who I am and not have to fulfill the roles that they had set out for me.
Thanks.
I am very envious of you, Bev, for all of the healthy connections that you were able to make back then. For me, it was I got introduced by to the Raleigh and Durham uh, gay scene by my first boyfriend. I guess he was 5 years older than me. He was also just out of the closet, and he had heard about all kinds of things. In other words, here were two baby gays. A baby gay is somebody who's just come out of the closet, doesn't know what to do yet. Here were two baby gays going from club to club to club, trying to find social connections. And we'd go from CC's to Power Company to bars up in DC. Um, I and the one thing that I wish that I really had have had was far more healthy role models to go from.
Mm.
Someone, you know, who and actually they were there. Their influence was not very large on my life at that point yet, and so over the years, I have come to rely upon the core group of very mature, very well socialized gay people, men and women, um, and recently become more dependent upon all my trans friends that to help me stay focused on just how much privilege I do have being who I am. The fight is not over,
Absolutely.
and we have there's so much more to do, and it particularly focuses with trans women of color. Uh, uh, really, all of our community of color that we need to be able to focus on making sure that they have these same kinds of very positive role models to follow. That's what I really wish I had have had.
Thank you, Jim. Bev, I'm going to throw it back to you. He did say that he had another baby gay who introduced him, helped introduce him to the gay scene. Who introduced you to the gay scene here, the lesbian scene?
Well, I can't remember specifically. It was probably my oldest friend that I met at the feminist bookstore. But anyway, I eventually found the bars and, loved to go dancing and would go out of state to national women's music festivals, which were quite frequent back in that time. So, yeah. Yeah, and of course the Lady Slipper concerts too. They were like the best.
Good. Mm-hmm. Jim, Bev mentioned some positive aspects back when she was coming out, Lady Slipper, the potlucks, etc. What do you recall any? What do you recall?
I remember meeting the Reverend Dr. Troy Perry, the founder of Metropolitan Community Churches, and how normal being gay was for him. And we got on a first name basis there for a very short amount of time. The positives all ended up being the core group of people who started to have more influence over my life, that I had ignored them and it's not to say that the bars were bad. It's just that that's only a part of life, and if I don't make sure that I have more than that going on, I get a very skewed sense of what's appropriate and what's not.
Thanks. Tori, as you hear this, when you hear them talk, what do you think for yourself? How do you react to that?
I think I identify with it a lot, especially what Jim just said about, the bars are only a part of life, because I think that if you look at my development, my progression, it sort of progressed from my gay reality just being the bars to being a bigger part of my life. And you know, just like I feel like the Raleigh-Durham area and really our country has grown up over that time. I grew up to the extent where I wasn't just going to spaces that were a club, and I began to meet gay people that were in other areas, like for instance, Stonewall Recreation League. That was very impactful, and the LGBT Center, for instance, like just getting involved in those spaces outside of just the spaces that were the club life. It sort of helped me to grow up.
So let me ask Bev a question. As the men are talking here, they're talking about bars. You're talking about potlucks and concerts. Oh, yeah. And tell me about how, as a lesbian back then, you saw the gay men and what they did versus what lesbians are doing.
Well, we were very separate then, so I didn't know what was going on with the gay men. We didn't have any connection because of feminism that really drove a wedge between the male community and the female community, regardless of whether it was straight or gay. So, you know, like the women's coffee house and the potlucks, they were solely female.
Mm-hmm. Jim, you cracked up with that. What made you crack up?
I was thinking, I am sure we looked like idiots to anybody that had any sort of sanity. That we were just so the stereotypes that people have about gay men of my generation as we come out, you know, I think we focused on making sure those stereotypes were spot on. Yes. Of how we were seen. We wanted to be seen as being macho but yet feminine. We wanted to see we call each other by feminine names and pronouns, phrases like "girl, what you talking about?" is stuff that we did all the time.
So, what was your perspective about the women, the lesbians? What was the gay perspective on the lesbians?
You see, I have a confession.
You have a confession.
My dear friend Lorraine is in the same room listening. Oh, goodness gracious.
Hi, Jim.
Lorraine, thank you so much for the influence.
Lorraine is Bev's wife, for those of you who
partner.
Okay.
Different generation.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Lorraine, you were one of the first women of our community that ever had any sort of influence on my life at all. And the tragic thing is that when I was growing up in the male community, it was even at St. John's, even in places where we were mixed together, I viewed women as completely inconsequential. They didn't relate. I didn't relate to them. They didn't try to relate to me. Well, maybe they did, but I wasn't paying attention.
Oh, let me stop you here. There's a comment from someone that says women and men were very separate in what we like to do. Sometimes bars versus dances, potlucks, until AIDS came in the Northeast. Then, this is important, then the lesbians came out to help with that cause. Right. They were assisting us in healthcare. Yes. I wonder if the reverse happened. I don't think if the women got sick, would we have stepped in?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Because at least, and now this was a very personal thing with me, I think. And you know, it's not that I hated women, I didn't care. And that's worse. And so, I mean, you know, to not care about women, to think of them as inconsequential, was a horrible travesty. And it was Lorraine and several people like you, Lorraine and Bev, who showed me how valuable all of the things that you all did. Now, I was coming out long after the women had taken over, making sure that gay men were healthy or treated, and so I didn't have all that history, and and you know it took a while for me to embrace the fact that there was so much value that I could get from women. So imagine when trans women became an issue for me. I mean, they were also inconsequential to me. Something I just you know, they were, and in my, back in 1995, 96, 97, whenever I went to Gay Days at Disney with 50,000 red shirt gay men and women going through Walt Disney World in Florida. I had never seen so many gay people at one time in my life. I never thought it would be possible to have that many gay people. But all of a sudden there was everybody there. And so, you know, to have blinders on toward only the people who were like me, that was so terribly unfair. And no wonder I didn't grow up. No wonder I was still a baby gay.
Wow. Okay. So very, very revealing, very deep. Thank you for sharing, Jim. Trey, let me ask you a question. As a gay person in Raleigh, what are you looking for? What do you've heard what they went through. What are you looking for?
So I kind of want to revert back. I think for me, I kind of was lucky to grow up as a teenager in an era when Lady Gaga popped off, and then kind of led like an effort that led a lot of people want to include LGBTQ people in mainstream media, maybe not for the right reasons, maybe because they saw it was profitable, but it was thankful to be able to have some kind of exposure later on. And then as I went on, came to Raleigh and I found a lot of spaces for the first time ever. I think now I'm concerned that we are focusing a lot of our activities in bars. I'm concerned that a lot of places that is available here in Raleigh are only places that sell alcohol. And I've seen personal experiences of, because that, and I will say I love going to a nice bar and going to a good gay bar. So I'm not knocking that. I love my gay bars. But I will say that I wish there were more spaces here that curated different forms of expression and community. The LGBT Center is doing a good job with a lot of their talks, but I would really like a community center around that will allow and support LGBT center and performances and art and more here in Raleigh. And I also am concerned, for instance, the warehouse district has a history, and before I was even here in Raleigh, was a history of being like the gay district. I've always heard that, and I'm fearful that that identity is being stripped away from Raleigh as well as we grow as a city. And I don't want to see us lose our spaces that still exist. I would like to see more spaces added on and that saved as well.
You brought up a topic, thank you for sharing. You brought up a topic of alcohol. I want to ask Bev, when you were growing up as a coming out in the early years with Raleigh here, what was alcohol and drugs in the lesbian community? Was it as blatant as in the gay community, the men's community?
I can't really speak to that because I'm not a drinker or a drug person.
But you knew other lesbians.
And all the things that I was involved in did not include alcohol or drugs. So I can't speak to the rest of the community. But I think that because of the women's movement happening at the same time, we were all about finding our personal power. And at least the women that I associated with, you know, didn't go to things where there was alcohol or drugs.
Okay. I have a question for both of Bev and for Jim. Did you have any experience in the warehouse district? Bev, let me ask you, and I'm quite sure you did, Jim, but let's get Bev first.
Well, my only experience in the warehouse district was that a childhood friend of mine, father owned the steel factory there, and his son, who was like a good friend of mine, started a nightclub there when I was in high school, I think. But it wasn't particularly gay.
Okay, particularly. Okay.
That I know of. I mean, I wasn't out until I was like in my 30s. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jim?
Oh yeah.
Alcohol, drugs, warehouse.
And alcohol, pornography. Didn't mess around with drugs much, but a lot of my friends did. At one point, I decided that I was not going to go to Legends anymore for New Year's Eve partying, because my friends would come up to me all tweaked out and they wouldn't even know who I was, and that just really bothered me. And I finally made a decision that no, I'm just not going to do that anymore. I changed my mind later on, and did go back whenever it was under new management. And things seemed to be a whole lot better, and I enjoyed it. But yeah, Tori's right. Having a place to know that it's safe to come is absolutely critical. I remember how absolutely scared I was to find a parking place to go to CC's that first night. I didn't know. I had heard stories about what went on in the warehouse district, and sure enough, I was approached by several opportunistic young men. Listen, sex work is not something that I frown on anymore. At one point, I did. But those folks have got it rough, and they're finding the very best way they can to make it through life. And so but that's not what I thought back then. And so it took every bit of courage I had to park my car and walk that half a block to get into that building. And whenever the LGBT Center of Raleigh left South Harrington Street, by that time, I didn't care where I parked in the warehouse district. But don't let me go too far away from there, because then I would be a little bit concerned as I was walking through. Interesting story, Les. You all created the very first center on Cabarrus Street, and were there for what, 2 years? It was 2 years, a year, 1 year. Okay. During that time, I parked my car. I wanted to go see what it was all about, and I parked my car on Cabarrus Street. And as I was walking up to the to where that little cubby hole of a center was, somebody said something to me that was that felt threatening. Now, probably they were just panhandling like all the folks do in all of downtown, but it felt threatening to me, and I turned around and I walked back and I got in my car and I left, and I never came to the Cabarrus Street Center.
Wow. Okay.
But the key to that is having a very, very safe space that that it's going to be okay if you park and you walk in.
Thanks. Thank you for sharing. Before we move ahead to the future, I want to ask Tori about alcohol, drugs, and as you hear the different folks talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing that the last few speakers mentioned. Personally, I've seen way too many of my friends and people that I've formerly dated go down to drugs and alcohol. And I think it can't be said more that we need more spaces that are not like, you know, the club scene, or this alcohol isn't the main thing. You know, I talked about how did that help me in my progression by coming to the LGBT Center and the Stonewall Recreation. But of course, we need more. We need more of those. And so, I mean, it's no other way to say it. We need to create more spaces.
More safe spaces.
Yeah, more safe spaces.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's move ahead in a few minutes that we have left. Well, I have a question here. Is there any concern that we are not progressing, or that we won't progress with our Supreme Court, or maybe some of the legislatures? Is there any concern that we are not progressing? I'll leave that open. Bev, or let me ask Bev.
I actually think that we're on the verge of going backwards.
Do you feel that, or is that what you're hearing?
That's what I feel, you know, by watching what's going on in all the Republican legislatures and with Trump and the whole bunch. You know, I feel like, you know, the first thing they want to do is to, you know, create a white supremacist patriarchal country again, so that they can have all the power. And then they will start, you know, they've started with the communities of color, and they will get back to us. That's the way I feel about it.
Jim?
And right now we are in a breath of fresh air. We have an affirming president, an affirming governor, an affirming mayor in Raleigh. You know, it's never going to get better than that. Now, it would be nice. It would be nice to also have an affirming legislature, but that's probably not going to happen. And what Bev is saying is right. It's a power issue where they know they have lost power, and now it's up to them to do everything they can to get that back.
Gotcha. Tori, what about you as a Gen X? What do you think about? Are you afraid we're going to lose what we got? Or you hope?
Yeah, I think we've made significant progress. You know, there's no question about that. Like even like with the bar I talked about earlier, where I encountered some racial difficulties when I was in school. Now I'm actually a member. I'm a VIP at that bar. So I mean, it's been progress in that respect. Like Trey mentioned, you know, the economic development may be causing the what we call the gay area to disappear. I think some of that is sort of catch-22, where a lot of times I think gay clubs may be struggling because we feel more comfortable going to straight bars. Mm-hmm. You know, so that's sort of some of that is a response to that. But I agree with Bev that, you know, it's going to depend on us and what we do, because it will be a struggle. You know, American history has always been a back and forth, you know, from Reconstruction to Reaganomics, where it's always a backlash. And I think right now we're seeing a backlash to a lot of the progression that we had. So it'll be up to us how we deal with it.
Thank you. Trey?
I think I agree with Tori. We made a certain amount of progress that now we're kind of at a standstill. It just feels like, for me, I'm fearful that we kind of went like this and then went to the top of the hill. We could either go backwards or continue going. Like, and I'm fearful that complacency of the progress we probably made since the Marriage Equality Act passed may also prevent people from realizing there is more to the fight than there is, that we still have to continue, and that it might just end up backfiring and progress will just revert.
My friend, Bishop Gene Robinson, the retired bishop of the Episcopal Church for the Diocese of New Hampshire, said that there will be no progress until we have made sacrifice. That is the way of progress from time in the beginning, is someone's going to have to die. Now, it may not be a literal death, but somebody has to make that sacrifice. And I am so proud of the people who have brought court challenges, the people who have laid their personal and financial and lives on the line for the progress that we've made. But that's what, and somebody asked the question, what was the first Pride Month like?
That's from a Generation Z person, a younger person,
Yeah.
who wants to know how is it different before the pandemic?
And that's the thing, is that whenever we were starting out with Pride marches, they were not parades. They were marches. They were very much a protest thing. We engaged and inflamed the protesters against the Pride marchers, where we argued with them. We sang "Jesus Loves Me Anyway" to them, and all that kind of thing, where we had to have that critical back and forth. And that's what Gene Robinson's talking about, is that we've got to have that back and forth until there's some change. And there may never be the change that we need. I certainly hope there will be, but
okay. Thanks, Bev. Could you respond to that too? What Pride was like for you when it first started happening? How is it different?
Well, I can't remember a lot of Pride marches, although I was living in Seattle for most of that. And they did have big marches. What I remember is going to DC a couple of times for different issues, but like the AIDS quilt and things like that. And I remember a Pride march in conjunction with that, and what stands out to me is the Texas contingency had this gigantic Texas flag that they carried down Pennsylvania Avenue, and people would throw money into it to raise funds for AIDS.
Wow. I think we can go on and on. I'm noticing, Les, I'm going to ask you, it's 7:57. We did say we're going to hold this for an hour, and it feels like this group can go on, but I want to respect our people who've joined and our panelists' time for tonight. Should we begin to wrap this up, or?
Yes, I would say so, George.
Okay. So let me ask for just one hope for the future generations from each of you. Let me start off with the youngest. Trey, what's one hope for future generations of gay people?
Liberation for Black and brown trans women and men and non-gender binary folks. I want liberation for them all. And I think once we center them in all our work, it benefits everyone in the spectrum.
Thank you. Tori?
Yeah, I would just conclude by saying there's more work that needs to be done, but my hope is that homophobia and racism and all of the other evilisms
I like that.
will become a thing of the past.
Okay. Jim?
I wish for every one of you to be able to find the most meaningful connections with other healthy people so that you can figure out a way to be able to thrive and be empowered to do all of this extremely important work that you've got ready and laid out for you. And never stop connecting with people, because that's where the strength, there is strength in numbers. Always strength in numbers. Keep connecting.
Thank you. Bev?
My wish is that we all know in the future and forever that we are extremely good people and that we are valuable, and that we belong everywhere and anywhere. And I look forward to the day when there are no longer a need for labels, and that we all are one people on this planet.
What else can we say after that? That's beautiful. Each one of you shared deeply, and I really very much appreciate your sharing of yourselves and sharing between the generations. Hopefully we'll be adding to history, that it won't be lost. I believe this will be posted to somewhere so that we will have this history for others in the future to remember. Les, it's 8 o'clock. I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, George.
Thank you all.
Thank you, George, for doing an excellent job of facilitating. And to all our guests, I could listen to another hour worth of this, frankly, because I think it's fascinating. And I'm really, it's kind of interesting to see how very similar, even though we're generations apart, we do go through the same kinds of trauma and experience and also victories. And I think that we have to acknowledge how far we have come and what a wonderful community we have. I'd also like to plug SAGE as a non-alcoholic safe space to socialize. And we plan to be doing more intergenerational programs in the future. So thank you everybody for speaking up, and thank to all our our viewers. I'm glad you were here. I think we had a fascinating discussion. So good night, everybody.
Well,
thank you.
Can I remind, before we go, can I remind everybody that if you want to save the chat that we have before we end the call, if you'll go over to the chat box and there's a, will it let us do that? Yes, file. Click on file. No, maybe it doesn't do that here. Never mind. It doesn't do that on webinars. But that on regular calls. Never mind. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, we are recording this program, and I'm hoping that at some point, if anybody wants the recording, we can forward it along to them. But we're going to work on that with PAX.
Is this going to be placed anywhere?
I don't know yet.
Posted. Okay.
But we'll if I will let the community know if and when it has been, and hopefully it will be.
Okay. Well, again, thank you all. Thank you very much for your time and effort.
Good night, everybody.